In the last section, we discussed why authentication is going to make a difference in exactly how our application behaves. We're now going to continue by tackling some of our React Router setup and getting some different components to display on the screen depending on what route a user is currently visiting. After we do this initial setup of routes, we'll then be able to add some different logic that toggles what a user is able to access inside of our application. So again, I've said this probably 3 times now. If you're in this course, kind of assuming that you know React, kind of assuming you know Redux, React Router, yeah, kind of assuming you're somewhat familiar with that as well, but I'm going to cover React Router assuming that you know very little, or at least have never really used it in a large application. So let's get to it. The first thing I want to talk to you about regarding React Router is I want to again point out to you that based on the route that a user is visiting inside of our application, we want to show different content on the screen. So for the landing page over here, if a user is at this route, like emaily.com/, I want to show our landing page, or essentially some marketing stuff that tells our users exactly what this application is for. When a user then navigates to the route emaily.com/surveys, I then want to show some different set of components on the screen. And then the same thing for surveys/new as well. So we're going to set up a couple different routes inside of our application. A route is a pairing, or kind of a rule you can think of, between the address that a user is looking at and the components that should be displayed on the screen at any given time. So let's flip over to our code editor, and we're going to start doing some of the setup with React Router. We're going to put all the configuration around the different navigation states of our application into the app.js file. Remember, the app.js file is really responsible for all that initial view layer setup, whereas our top level index.js file is responsible for all of our Redux setup, or all the kind of data setup of our application. So inside the app.js file, we're going to start off by first importing the React Router DOM library. So at the top, we'll import, and we're just going to put a curly brace there for right now, from React-Router-DOM, like so. Now, if you've used earlier versions of React Router, like version 2 or version 3, that's totally fine. You might notice that the library name here has changed just a little bit. So there's now 3 distinct React Router libraries. There's React Router DOM, which is what we're using right here. React Router DOM contains a set of React Router helpers specifically themed around allowing you to navigate around the DOM, or at least an environment that uses the browser DOM. There's also React Router Native, which is for use with React Native, and there's also the core React Router library. The core React Router library contains some logic that is shared between both React Router DOM and the React Router Native libraries. In the end, in practice, at this point, all we really ever care about, and I'm talking about like any application we probably ever work on, we really just care about React Router DOM, and we don't really have to worry about those other 2 at all. Now, the React Router DOM library exports a couple different helpers that we're going to want to import into this file, or at least I should say just 2 in this file. The first thing that we're going to import is an object called browser router, and the second is an object called route, like so. The browser router can be thought of as the brains of React Router. It's the thing that tells React Router how to behave. It's the thing that looks at the current URL and then changes the set of components that are visible on the screen at any given time. The route object right here is a React component that is used to set up a rule between a certain route that the user might visit inside of our application and a set of components that will be actually visible on the screen. In practice, I think that setting some of these things up is not really the worst thing in the world. So let's go through some initial setup here with some kind of dummy test components, and we'll get a much better idea of what's going on, okay? So again, I want to first do a little bit of setup with just some dummy components. After we do these dummy components, we'll then come back later on and create real versions of each of the components we're going to be making use of. So we'll first create a couple dummy components right above the app one. So I want to make a dummy component called header. This is going to be a functional component that's going to return a div. And you know what? Let's make this nice and big. Let's make it like an h2. And it's going to contain an h2 with the text header. And then I'm going to repeat this same exact process 3 more times. For the second one, I'm going to change the text to be dashboard, dashboard. I want a survey new, and then I want a landing as well. Okay, so again, we're going to get some dummy components like these right here working together nicely with React Router, and then over time we'll come back and replace each of these with a very real component that we create inside of our application. Now before we dive really into how we use these two objects, the browser router and the route, I think that we'll take a quick break so that this section doesn't run on too long. When we come back, we're going to make use of these helpers from React Router DOM along with these dummy components to get some content to show up inside of our application. So, quick break, and I'll see you right back here in just 1 minute.